Hey everyone, it's Joey from trycatchthrow.io. Today we're taking a look at CSS Calc and a pretty cool example, I think, of a use case for CSS Calc that I ran into the other day with a project I was doing at work. So here's kind of the idea of what is going on here. We have these sort of node items or tree nodes, I don't know what you want to call them, but they're these containers here, these square containers. And they're defined right here in my CSS. So they have a position of relative, and I'll explain that in a second. They have a height of 100, a width of 100 pixels, and a border of 2 pixels. Overall, I am using box sizing border box just for context, just so you know. And on the top of these container items, I have a pseudo element. So I'm using the before pseudo element here, and I'm using absolute positioning for them, and that's why we had relative on the containers themselves down here. And then I gave them a height of 30 pixels and a width of 2 pixels. So that's how we got these lines. So the lines on these containers here are simply borders on this box, but these are actual 2 pixel wide by 30 pixel tall boxes themselves, and then I just gave them a background of black in order to give the appearance of a line, so to speak. Then I offset them by 30 pixels from the top, and then I said left 50% and margin left 1 pixel. And the reason why I did a margin left -1 pixel is if I just leave the left position at 50%, those 2 pixels that are the width of the dimension of this child div will actually be on the slightly to the right off center by 1 pixel, so I have to offset it by half of the width of that line. So that's how I get these perfectly centered on top and 30 pixels tall. So that's how I created those. So these are all contained inside of a flex parent. So I'm defining this parent right here. I'm giving it a position of relative, and again I'm using a pseudo element, and we'll talk about that in just a second. It's given the display of flex, so each of these are flex children. Justify content of space between, that makes sure that the space is evenly distributed between each item. I'm doing a line item center, which actually, do I need to do that? I don't think I do. I could just get rid of that. A width of 50%, so that way this outer container is going to be 50% of the width of the screen. So as I reduce it, you can see that it shrinks down, so it's always 50% of the width. Then I do a margin 0 auto just to center it on the screen, and I gave it a padding on the top of 50 pixels just to bump it down so we could see what's inside of the container a little bit more clearly. So finally, the final missing link was to create this line on the top. And so I knew that I had to use a pseudo element, and I knew that it needed to be less than 100% of the width of the container, obviously. But I couldn't just use a strict percentage, because if I did use just a strict percentage, you'll see what happens here in a second. So instead, I discovered CSS Calc and set the width to 100% minus 104 pixels. And the reason why I use 104 pixels is because the width of the stems here are 2 pixels. So in order to make sure that they extend perfectly to the edge, I needed to account for the width of these stems. So I made this 104 pixels. And then all I did was, push it up to the top. So it was positioned on the top, and I gave it a left of 52 pixels. So basically half of the width of one of these containers here. And the reason why I needed to use CSS Calc is because as the browser resizes, or as this was flexing, so to speak, the space in between here was getting smaller and smaller, but it wasn't getting smaller by strictly a percentage. It was getting smaller by a percentage plus a static width, if that makes sense. And that static width was these dimensions on the outside here were always going to remain the same, since these containers here themselves were a fixed width. So let me go ahead and comment out this width attribute here. 90% doesn't look quite right. Okay, so let's say we bumped it down to 86%. Not quite right. So 88 maybe? Not there. 89%. Okay, 89% looks pretty close. Maybe 88.75. Oh, nice, perfect. We got it, we got it, we got it. Oh, wait. Now when I resize, we have this thing going on. Then you think to yourself, okay, well, if I'm resizing and it's extending too far over the edge, maybe I just need to make a media query at each breakpoint, but then you realize there's way too many for that to work. And there's just a lot of too many variables to try to figure out. But what you really know about what's true going on here is this is a percentage, but it's also a static width on either end as far as what space is not being taken up. So this is how I solved the problem. I went ahead and used CSS Calc and said, okay, why not make it just 100%? And then subtract what those static widths are, and then shove it from the left-hand edge half of the width of whatever that is. So thanks for watching. If you like the video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this on CSS tricks and tips and stuff like that, be sure to subscribe. And if you want the code to this particular example, I'll include a link to both the public available code on CodePen and a breakdown of how I solved this problem on our blog at trycatchthrow.io. Thanks for watching.